Hello people, welcome back to the channel. Today I thought I would share with you some interesting tips on how to improve your reading of kanji. By no means am I a kanji expert. However, after 12 months of intensive study, I have reached the point where I can actually recognize some interesting patterns that might really be useful to Japanese learners. I have already made a video on how I have learned kanji with Remembering the Kanji by James Hasek, so I'm not going to touch upon this again. However, many of you at the time asked me if the book teaches the pronunciation, and I said no, adding that I considered it to be fairly logical considering, unlike Chinese, the characters in Japanese have multiple readings. In Japanese, you have two readings. You have onyomi, which is derived from the Chinese pronunciation of the characters, and you also have kunyomi, which is the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese characters. The funny thing though is that within onyomi and kunyomi you also have different readings, which needless to say makes things even more complicated. Let's take this simple character. It means sun or day, and it has multiple readings. It can be read ni, like in Nihon. It can be read jitsu, like in honjitsu. It can be read ka, like in mikka. It can be read nichi, like in nichiyobi. So one basic character, multiple readings. Even words that have the exact same meaning using the same kanji but that are spelled differently do not have the same pronunciation. Let's consider these two words. The first one is pronounced kitanai. The second one is pronounced yogoreta. Both mean dirty, but they are pronounced differently. I will dedicate a specific video to this topic because I found it particularly interesting, but for now let's focus on the pragmatic and positive side of things, which is that even though multiple readings exist, for a sizable portion of words you can actually recognize certain patterns that are most commonly used. Let's first consider Okurigana. Okurigana are words that are made up of both kanji and hiragana. For such words, it will always be kunyomi, like shimekiri. Shimekiri means deadline. It comes from the word shimeru, which means to tighten, and the word kiru, which means to cut. Providing you know these two words and you also know that the word will obviously be kunyomi, reading shimekiri becomes quite easy. Even for words or phrases that at first glance appear quite complicated, if you know that the reading will be kunyomi and you know the different words that compose an expression, it becomes fairly easy to read. Let's consider this expression. It is read miwatasu kagiri hirogaru. Miwatasu kagiri hirogaru. Because you see both hiragana and kanji, you know it will be kunyomi. And the reading is composed of miru, watasu, kagiri, and hiroi. If you know all these words, it becomes fairly simple to read in most instances. On the other hand, onyomi never uses hiragana. Does that mean that all kanji compounds, words that only have kanji and no hiragana, always use onyomi? Well, no, that'd be too simple, and I think that we can all agree that it's not something the Japanese writing system is prone to do. When you can make things complicated, why would you make them simple? I mean, simplicity is so overrated. Quite logically, there are four main reading patterns. You either have onyomi, onyomi, or kunyomi, kunyomi, or onyomi, kunyomi, or kunyomi, onyomi. If you want more details, I would recommend watching Yuki's explanation on this from the channel Yuki's Japanese TV. But to sum it up, the onyomi, onyomi reading is the most common for the Jukugo. But now that we've understood this aspect of the Japanese language, the question is, how do you actually improve your reading of kanji? The most obvious answer would be that you have to expand your vocabulary and to read multiple texts and come across words as many times as possible to remember how they are read. But that's probably not the reason why you're watching this video. The Japanese language has a very limited spectrum of possible sounds, which is the reason why there are so many homophones. And sometimes, especially if you're not used to languages with many homophones, or if the context does not make the meaning clear, this can be really challenging. Now that we've understood it's sometimes challenging, let's consider the glass half full. This also means there aren't that many possible readings. And even better than that, in many instances, one main radical's pronunciation remains the same when the said radical appears as a component in another kanji. This was the tip I wanted to share with you. If you have not understood, let's consider a couple of examples. This main radical's pronunciation in most instances is cho, like in kocho, which means headmaster. But if you consider the word kinchou suru, which is to be stressed, the pronunciation remains the same even though the radical is now a component of the main kanji. In the first word, kocho, the first kanji is pronounced ko, like in the word gakko, or like in the word kokan. In kocho, the radical is only a component of the main kanji. However, it has retained the same pronunciation. Let's consider now this kanji. In many instances, its pronunciation is gi. This is the case in shihon shigi, capitalism. But if you take the word jigi, it is also pronounced gi, even though it's now a component of another kanji. Same can be said for fushigi. The last kanji is pronounced gi, even though the main radical is now a component of another kanji. This word is pronounced kyoyu suru, and it means to share. The pronunciation of the main radical is kyo, but when the main radical is a component of another kanji, it also retains its pronunciation, like in the word teikyo suru, which appears in the expression sapoto teikyo suru, to offer support. This word is pronounced shoukai suru, to introduce. The main radical's pronunciation is retained when it appears as a component in another kanji, like in the word sekai. For the final example, I have chosen this kanji. It's usually pronounced shi or shiki, like in kekkon shiki. However, when it appears as a component in another kanji, it also retains its pronunciation many times, like in the word shiken. I'm going to stop here with the examples because you might get bored, but I just want you to know that there are many other examples, and this pattern works really well in most instances. The most difficult part, of course, in this case, is to be able to memorize the right spelling, but obviously this only becomes a real challenge, a real problem if you actually want to learn how to write rather than just to be able to read, which is usually not what people tend to do. So far in the examples I have shown you, the main radical that determined the reading appeared on the right-hand side as a component. Let's see an example where the main radical appears on the left-hand side when it is a component. The main character in this case is this, which does not seem to appear in isolation in Japanese, unlike in Chinese. This word is pronounced ryoshin, and it means parents, while this one is shinsen, like in the word shinsen na sakana, fresh fish. This kanji also appears in the word shinkansen. Even though the pattern I've just shown you works fairly well, there are also instances when it doesn't work. Let's consider this radical. In most instances, it's either pronounced han, hen, or ban, like in hantai suru. The main radical's pronunciation is retained in the words like shubansha or gohan, or henji. But this word, which means hypothesis, is not pronounced hansetsu, it's pronounced kasetsu. Usually, this kanji is always either pronounced ka or kari. So yeah, in some cases you just have to guess and go for it. You know, it's a gamble. But overall, what I have just shown you works really well. The interesting thing, obviously, would be to understand why certain characters have evolved in a certain direction while others have not. But that's something I'll get to learn over time. That's all for today's video. I truly hope this was helpful to you. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and do all the funky things people do on YouTube, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!